Imagine knowing exactly what your students are learning and exactly which steps you need to take next.
Join us in Down with the Reading Quiz to craft meaningful and productive formative assessments that move away from gotcha moments of basic recall and toward assessing what your students actually can do.
In this 30-minute free masterclass, we'll share 3 powerful assessment keys that work for any novel at any time of the year.
Head to shop.bravenewteaching.com/masterclass to sign up, and we'll also send you a free workbook to keep track of all your notes.
Once again, that's shop.bravenewteaching.com/masterclass to nail formative assessments forever. Well, hello and welcome back to Brave New Teaching. It's Amanda here, and I am here with a special episode. It's an interview today, and we had the chance to speak with Kareem Farah from the Modern Classroom Project. And this was such a special time to sit with a person who actually understands all the things that we've been talking about on this podcast. The mission of the Modern Classroom Project is so very aligned with what we're doing over here at Brave New Teaching. And so if you've never heard of the Modern Classroom Project, they are a nonprofit organization working to mentor teachers into a new era of teaching and learning and supporting students. Kareem will talk a lot about his journey from teacher to founder, co-founder of this incredible organization, and their goals to help teachers, stay away from that sage on the stage learning of being at the front of the class and not really being in touch with what's happening in the rest of the room. And so it was really cool to find an organization that is so closely aligned with all of the things that we have been talking about here with you on the podcast. So Marie wasn't able to join us today, so sending tears her way. Boo! But it's okay. I took the interview by the reins, and I think that you're going to love everything that we have to share with you today. So let me tell you a little bit about Kareem Farah, who you are going to hear from in just a little bit. And Kareem spent his teaching career as a math teacher. He's worked in Hawaii and Washington, D.C. He went to Washington University in St. Louis. He received his master's degree in secondary ed from Johns Hopkins. And he's not really the kind of guy who's used a traditional lecture model, even in math. He's really been successful with a blended model where students are accessing content through videos and then having time to work with him in those small groups or one-on-one. And so the cornerstone that he says of his classroom was the ability for students to work at their own pace, and then his ability to assess them on mastery as they're working at their own pace. And so with that success, with that model going so well in his classroom, he co-founded the Modern Classrooms Project, and they've been rocking and rolling ever since. And now they are just all over the world helping teachers redesign their classrooms around a blended, self-paced, mastery-based learning module. So this is such an exciting idea, I think, for us brave new teachers to tackle and to think about how this could work with what we know how to do and what we're trying to do in ELA, what we're trying to do in all of our other subject areas that are here. So without further ado, let's jump into the interview. Cue the music. You're listening to Brave New Teaching, and we are so much more than a podcast.
We give teachers the inspiration, support, and tools to challenge the status quo.
I'm Amanda, and I'm a former English teacher from Illinois.
And I'm Marie, and I'm a teacher from Southern California.
Join us at bravenewteaching.com to find out more about our courses, festivals, and get every episode's show notes.
We're so glad you're here. Enjoy the show.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back, and we are so excited to welcome Kareem to the podcast. Hello, can you say hi to our listeners and tell us all about yourself?
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me. My name is Kareem Farah. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Modern Classrooms Project. But before I was the co-founder and CEO of the Modern Classrooms Project, I was a teacher. I actually founded this organization in my classroom in DC public schools back in 2018. I taught high school math for years. I generally spent my time in communities where we were serving a really high need student population. And when I say high need, I mean struggling academically, a large amount of chronic absenteeism, a ton of trauma. Face the challenges that a lot of teachers face, which is trying to figure out a way to meet a high diversity of learning levels and social emotional needs within the four walls of my classroom, and designed the instructional approach that we currently scale at the Modern Classrooms Project in my classroom in DC Public Schools with my co-founder in 2016. And today scale that across the country. So that's a little bit about me.
Oh my gosh, just a little bit. Just a little bit. Tell me, okay, before we even go, okay, you started this in your classroom. What on earth did that look like? I mean, how did you, where did that come from? Did you saw the need and then this idea was born, or was it that organic, or how did that all go down?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. Not a ton of people ask that question, and I think it's an important one. So we never intended to found an organization.
Okay.
I will get questions sometimes around how do you start something? And I'm always like, you start by not wanting to start something. And instead, you just actually care about a problem and try to figure out how to solve it, right? So I think for me and for my co-founder, the problem was obvious. We had a job. The job was to meet a broad diversity of learning levels and social emotional needs. And we were equipped with a model of teaching that wasn't designed to do that at all, right? In fact, it was designed hundreds of years ago to deliver information in the most convenient way possible to a group of students that didn't necessarily honor their unique needs. So our goal was to create a solution to meeting students' needs more effectively. And trust me, if we didn't have to create our own solution, we would have used a different one. But the reality was when we went on a mission to look for better ways to meet students' needs effectively, it was a pretty uninspiring learning journey, right? It was a journey of one where you bump into buzzword after buzzword after buzzword, personalized learning, competency-based instruction, inquiries, student-centered instruction. And you kind of go, cool, like it. Thanks for the definition. What do I do? And then that's where the answers stopped coming in. And that's when we realized the world was anxious to make these buzzwords come to life, but the world didn't actually have viable solutions for teachers in schools and districts across the country to do that. So we had this kind of moment where we were like, all right, it's either we do it ourselves or we don't teach anymore because we're not happy. And my co-founder really was the first creator of the model, and that he had his first iteration. He taught one floor above me and taught math. And I actually learned from him and then made it my own in my classroom. We founded the organization only because it worked. And it worked such that we were happier, our admin was pumped, and I won an award in the district that made us realize that this is something that other people were really eager to also learn. So we should probably spend some time figuring out a way to train other teachers on this approach. So it was that organic, and we sit here today shocked that it all happened in 5 years.
Oh, well, it's so exciting. And then through the pandemic, my word, I'm sure that was, Marie and I started this podcast in 2019. We had this long list of ways we were going to serve teachers. And, it was just this kind of, very straightforward plan. And then our first episode dropped in April of 2020. And we were like, hey, caveat, we recorded this in December, so we're adjusting, but you've, I'm sure, had to adjust through all that. We don't need to go through that trauma. But I did want to, before we hear more about the actual project, I was talking to Marie before this interview, and we were really curious about your joy in the classroom. Because I think we're going to spend a lot of time solving and discussing the problems. We'd love to start with what was your joy in the classroom, your favorite experiences as an educator, and how did those kind of seek, create this urge for you to seek equitable experiences for students?
Yeah, I think at its core, I was never the teacher that was obsessed with the content. I wasn't oh my God, quadratic equations are the coolest thing ever.
Wow.
I was always a person that saw education and school and classrooms as a place where all these incredibly goofy young people come together and are supposed to learn a lot of academic skills, but more importantly, frankly, a lot of the sort of 21st century skills of setting your own goals, using your time effectively, knowing how to interact with your peers, knowing how to collaborate, knowing how to lean on others, knowing when to not lean on others, those kinds of things. And my joy in the classroom was being able to build relationships with students such that they felt like they could achieve their full potential. that they understood that school was a place to learn skills that weren't just academic, and that when they put their best effort forward, it positioned them to actually create a broader set of opportunities for themselves. And I knew that the real way to do that usually had to involve a high percentage of my time being spent in one-on-one and small group discussions. Because a lot of that work is understanding what makes a student tick and then figuring out how you can articulate why them coming to school every single day is a worthwhile investment for them. And when it worked is when the joy was at its highest, right? When a student who was skeptical about the purpose of school or skeptical about the purpose of class and math, when you could get a student to figure out why this process was an important one for their own personal fulfillment, nothing beat that. It was the coolest thing ever, right? To see a student transform in that way over the course of a year. So that's what brought me joy. I didn't necessarily, I wasn't a nerd about the content, and I certainly wasn't like interested in all these tricks of the trade, like behavior management tricks of the trade, or being at the front of the room and commanding. That stuff always felt like a distraction from the purpose, or like a poor avenue or ends to a mean, when the real goal was building relationships with students, having them learn content, but more importantly, having them learn more about themselves and what they're great at, and capitalizing on that.
I can remember mentoring a teacher. We were both new the same year, but I had been teaching for 10 years. It was her, I think, first or second year out of school. So I was a mentor, even though I was new in the school as well. And I can remember talking to her, and similar to what you're saying, she was so frustrated every time she tried to do some new things that we were trying. And I said, listen, we have this massive responsibility on our shoulders to redefine what school is for kids. They have been taught to believe that they are instruments in somebody else's orchestra. And they've been taught to sit there and listen and sit there and do this. And it's not about you. They've been taught that. I've always taught high school. I've always taught mostly 10th and above because ninth graders make me crazy. But truthfully, I mean, that I feel like was the joy for me too. And I'm sure you'll talk about this with mentoring. I feel like working against that narrative that we have developed for kids. I feel like by the end of the year, I finally convinced them that, school is about like exploring and discovering yourself, and it's all these things. And then I may or may not pass them off to a colleague that continues that narrative. So it's an interesting time in education. So I am curious to hear more about the mentorship program and how that works. And then maybe later, if you can remember, because I'm asking you this question now, but like, how does that translate right in that situation when maybe it's not school wide? How do you help teachers through that?
Yeah. I mean, I think what's unique about us is that we don't just help teachers broadly with teaching. Right. So we're not like your overarching professional development organization that seeks to, support you with anything you need as you continue to improve the rigor of instruction in your school setting. Like, we have a model, right? The model is a blended self-paced mastery-based one. It works in any curriculum. It works in any grade level. It works with any technology tool. It is a new way to think about teaching. Our experience as teachers when we were in the classroom is when some thing or person or institution showed up on a Tuesday at 4 p.m. and just explained how a tool worked, or explained how a principle applied, or showed us how to use a graphic organizer, that felt not particularly useful. Like, you just added more to my plate and you didn't help me solve anything. It felt pretty disconnected from us and our experiences. It was like, thank you for this, but like, I don't really know whether you know what I'm struggling with today. And it always did not include any dynamic that was work time and feedback, right? So all those things were missing. And that's just kind of the base case of how professional learning works. So when we first scaled our organization, we started with this little pilot program in DC where we would just create a fellowship program. A small group of teachers would learn our model and get a robust amount of support. When there was real appetite, so we first built our free course, and thousands of teachers joined our free course to just like learn about our model. And we said, well, what's the next step up from our free course? We really thought about it through the lens of what's the professional development experience we would not hate? That's how we're going to design this, right? So the first thing we said was people are going to build real things for the classroom. That's like number one.
Hands down. Revolutionary.
Yeah, right. Shocking. People that are really busy want to do things that are actually useful in their classroom.
Wow.
So, case in point. So, the first thing about our mentorship program is it's built around a series of assignments, and those assignments are the real things that you create and then pilot and run in your classroom. The second thing we said is when you build stuff, you need feedback. Yeah. Like, no question about it. It's really unhelpful to then try something new, build it, and then be like, I have no idea if it works, and I don't know if it's high quality. See you later. So then we said, well, we've got to give feedback to people on what they're creating in these assignments. And then the third piece was who should be giving that feedback and what should that relationship look like? And that's when we said, I want feedback from someone else who's done this and who has some level of commonality with my experience. So if I'm a science teacher, I want a STEM teacher giving me feedback. And I want that STEM teacher who's giving me feedback to understand what's currently happening in classrooms and to understand how this model actually works. And that's what led us to say, well, the best way to do this is to look at all the people who currently do our model beautifully and build a community of mentors. And those mentors are the people we pair participants with as they design their modern classroom. And that's what led to the creation of the mentorship program. I think what is particularly special about ours is that all our mentors are real teachers. So like, it's not like they're full-time mentors. So in particular, and I think the best examples of this in K-12 education always include this, right? Where you have this sort of like super teacher who teaches and mentors other teachers learning how to teach or improving their practice. We use the same model, but it's virtual and it's asynchronous. So like the teacher, you can join our mentorship program and you might get mentored by a teacher in California and you might be from Kansas. But what's common about it is that this person does the model beautifully. You want to learn the model. You both teach science in middle school and you both use Google Classroom, right? Like those might be the variables that lead to the pairing.
That's so cool. So how do you even get involved? How do you get started? Like, what does that whole process look like? Because I'm listening, I've read on your website, but like hearing it from you, I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm in the classroom. I am like chomping at the bit to be part of all of this. What does my trajectory through the Modern Classroom project look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, first, like, go learn about our model, right?
Yeah.
Phase one of our model, blended instruction, means you stop lecturing in your classrooms. You learn how to build your own little videos to replace your lectures and leverage digital resources. So you're no longer that sage on the stage. Second part of the model is letting students work at their own pace within each unit of study. So we're talking about 1 or 2 weeks at a time. Students are given game boards and little trackers, and they tackle the content at their own pace in chunks before they take the summative assessment. And the last frontier is mastery-based grading. So students don't move on from one lesson to the next because of the day of the week, but because they've actually shown understanding. So the first thing I'd say is if what I just said does not resonate with you, you can probably turn off the podcast at this point because
they're probably not here, to be honest.
Exactly. So once you have buy-in, I mean, I tell everybody, just start with our free course. We're a nonprofit, which means that we do not ever put a paywall behind our content and resources, right? So our free course has every content or resource we ever created. We also have a Facebook group with near 15,000 teachers right now, just constantly collaborating.
That's amazing.
So those two things are where you should start if you don't have access to funding to get involved in the bigger program. The bigger program is the mentorship program. That is when you get paired with that mentor. That's when you get the feedback and all that kind of stuff. And that program, really, educators get in there in a variety of ways. So one way is their school or district funds them to go through the program. And that can come with a large partnership. For example, like, you have a district partnership where hundreds of teachers are enrolling in our program to learn the model. Or you can go to your principal and say, I really want this professional learning experience. It costs $750. Will you fund that? So that's one way to get in. The other way is we do have a variety of scholarship opportunities. Actually, when you go on our website, you'll see scholarship opportunities. A lot of them are regional. So that means like people in Chicago right now can learn our model because a bunch of Chicago philanthropists said, we'll pay for any teacher who wants to learn this model in Chicago, right? So you should also check out the regions where we have funding so you can just go and fire in. And then there's our general scholarship opportunities so that when we have availability and funding, we can let anyone on our wait list into our mentorship program as well. So those are kinds of the three kinds. And then you can pay your own way. But like, I never say that to teachers, because like, I don't want you paying $750 out of your pocket to do this. There are other ways to get in. And B, like instead just focus on the free course and see if you can get the funding elsewhere is what I tell people on the kind of pay your own way. It's just not how we've never designed it that way. We don't care about people paying it makes us sad when people pay their own way. So that's how you can get involved with our work. We also have a podcast, which is a useful way to like hear from implementers and modern classrooms leaders to just hear about how implementation works. Did I answer that question?
Well, yeah, totally. I'm just like, okay, that's great. We're going to have everything linked in our show notes. So for people who are like, yes, but I'm driving, please remember everything is always in the show notes. All right, brave new teachers, I have an EQ tip of the day brought to you by me. My name is Amanda Cardenas, and I love essential questions, and I wanted to give you a tip. If you've never heard me talk about this before, it needs to have a permanent home on the podcast. So here is said permanent home. If you are struggling with a short story unit, right? You're trying to teach short stories. You love short stories. You love teaching them in a unit altogether versus spreading them out throughout other units. Cool. But we do run into this issue sometimes where they can kind of feel disjointed, right? If you're just kind of going story to story to story, it can be difficult to narrow down which skills you actually want to focus on, right? Like I'm teaching the short story. Okay, so what are you teaching? Are you teaching plot structure? Are you teaching characterization? Are you teaching setting? Are you teaching conflict? Are you teaching, like, what is the purpose of using short stories? And so if you've ever felt, like that you're having either that skill kind of disjointedness or the topic feels disconnected, guess what? I have a response. I have an answer for you. And that is to use an essential question. Yes, I will pause for applause, shocked amazement at this piece of advice. Okay, so here's the deal. Short stories alone are fine, but if they don't have anything to do with one another, you get a lot of students to disconnect, right? They stop, they kind of don't know what's going on. They're trudging through. By the time you get to the third short story, they're like, so what? So here's the so what. Let's introduce an essential question as that umbrella, the spinal cord, whatever metaphor you are feeling today, to connect your stories together. And let's choose stories that build off of one another in responding to that essential question. So I'm sure you're wondering, Amanda, do you have an example? Yes, of course I do. Of course I do. And I'm going to link my example in the show notes because I know that will be super helpful for you. But there are so many different ways you can go about this. I think that the first thing you need to do is think about the short stories that you have available to you. Do you have an anthology that you're expected to teach from? Do you have free reign and tons of choice? One thing that I like to do if you do have choice is I actually like to do a blend of traditional short stories and excerpts from novels. Pretty much all of your favorite YA novels, your favorite adult novels will have an excerpt on their publisher's website. And so I have a blog post about this that I will share with you in the show notes that you can kind of read through how I've done that. And I also have a couple of specific resources available for you too, where I've already done that work for you. But what's nice about using your novel excerpts is that if you're focused on a certain skill or you're focused on a certain genre, you can really pick through a much wider range of diversity in authorship, a much wider range in the approaches, right? So maybe you have multiple narrators in a novel, but you only have a single narrator in the short story. But all the while, you're looking at this essential question and you're looking at these couple of skills. So introducing this idea of using novel excerpts as short stories has really opened the door for me on these types of units. But let me give you a couple of unit ideas. So let's think about a short story unit that is coming of age. How about a coming of age short story unit? Here's one that I have, and the EQ that I use with it is, when does childhood end and adulthood begin? And in this short story unit, we are featuring all kinds of things that examine that blending moment between the innocence of childhood and that brutal reality of adulthood. And students are working through all of these short stories to pinpoint the moment and be able to define the moment when childhood ends and adulthood begins. They're working to be able to convey in words, in writing, what the coming of age journey looks like. And so that is the difference between an essential question-based short story unit versus a short story unit where we're just reading stories and looking at plot diagrams. So if you're ready for this kind of revolutionized way of looking at your units, think first about essential questions. If you need help or you need support, I have plenty of that waiting for you in the show notes. Go straight there right now. Muddingteaching.org is my website where you can go dig in even deeper and read about the issue from the lens of a blog post before you're ready for a resource. You're going to have your mind blown. This will change everything for you. I guarantee it. So EQ tip of the day, use EQs with everything, including your short story unit. Back to the show. Okay, so I'm going to change gears a tiny smidge of a little bit. I'm really curious about some of the frequent recommendations that you are giving teachers that could improve their overall, let's say I'm maybe I'm starting to think about Modern Classroom Project, or I'm just right now kind of in survival mode. What are your recommendations for improving that overall satisfaction of being in the classroom and helping with emotional dysregulation? We had talked about that earlier before recording, that we see that so often in students and that the behaviors are conflicting with our desire to teach content. And then we want to have relationships, but we're having other issues. How are you coaching and thinking through all of that with teachers in this era?
Yeah. So, I think my answer to this is both clear and not easy.
Yeah.
So
I hear that.
The first thing is there is no Band-Aid. And whenever someone sells you a Band-Aid, it's not going to make you feel better for a long time. So, changing your disciplinary structure from a 1-2-3 system to a, 4-7-9 system isn't what's going to get students to engage. It isn't going to solve the emotional dysregulation problem. And, at its core, I think the most important thing that everyone needs to internalize in K-12 education is our number one goal should be to optimize learning experiences to maximize one-on-one and small group time. Because you cannot be trauma-informed from the front of the room. You cannot de-escalate a student's emotional dysregulation from the front of the room. You can't address a giant learning gap that is causing the student to have no confidence in math from the front of the room. You can't do that because almost all of those circumstances are pretty personal to the students themselves. So trying to do it whole group almost never works. That does not mean whole group doesn't have value. In fact, in our model, we encourage you bringing students together. But it's not to address those individual experiences. You bring kids together because there's value in collaboration. There's value in discussion. But the idea that I am going to figure out a way for emotionally dysregulated students to feel supported in my classroom, and I'm going to do that from the front of the room, just does not have a pathway to success. So the first thing I always say is figure out how to get away from being in the front of the room and figure out how to ensure that when you walk into your classroom, whether it's 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 90 minutes, all day long, that the vast majority of your time when you leave the building every single day was spent in small group and one-on-one settings, the vast majority of your time. We provide a pathway there, which is our model. That is the point of our model, but there may be other ways to get there. I'm not familiar, frankly, with any compelling ones, which is why we designed the model, but that's your number one goal. I think once you do that, what I always tell folks these days is it's not about disengagement, it's about re-engagement. This is in particular why being at the front of the room is a hard place to do that. Because when you're at the front of the room, you're worried about how one student's learning experience is disrupting another student's learning experience. So it's not about re-engagement. It actually is about disengagement. Because when I'm at the front of the room and those two kids are disengaged, every minute they're disengaged, everyone else is disengaged with them. So I got to address this now. I can't de-escalate the situation. I'm calling them out. And that never really works particularly well, right? But when you are no longer at the front of the room, when students are in a student-centered learning environment, well, now I can focus on re-engagement instead of disengagement. So instead of going up to a student and saying, why are you on your phone? You can go to a student and say, hey, I noticed you've been on your phone. What is it going to take for you to re-engage in the learning experience? Mm-hmm. Hey, I noticed you were upset and your head's down. Do you want to have a conversation outside? Like, do you think you can get back into it today? And that changes the architecture of a conversation with a student. It's one that's much more accessible to the student. And it's one that's much more honest with the way that the world works. Like, you don't go into the real world and you go into a workplace and you just see a person at the front of the workplace going, what are you doing over there? And why are you doing this over here? And can you get it together? Right? Like, everyone would be like, get off my back. So I use TikTok. I love TikTok. I'm on TikTok all the time. I don't measure my productivity based on whether or not I am on TikTok. I measure my productivity partially whether I'm able to get off TikTok fast enough so that I'm actually accomplishing what I need to do. And if someone was watching me and being like, why do you check TikTok sometimes? It'd be like, because it's interesting, it's fun, and I need a break, right? Mm-hmm. And no one says that's a problem. But in school, we operate as if any time a student picks up their phone, they are suddenly breaking a rule. That's so disconnected from reality. That's so disconnected from what's productive. And the reason we've hung on to those principles is because we are reliant on an instructional model that exists with a teacher at the front of the room commanding and controlling. And that just doesn't work. And it's going to work less and less over time.
Well, and I think you said this earlier too, even though but we also might get the lip surface of do small groups, do this. Like we might get directives. We might even get in undergrad, right? Recommendations to do that. But the modeling of that, or like the real lived, what does that actually look like, is far and few between in my experience. I feel like I've had teachers come to my room to see what I do, but I don't remember ever, like, where did I learn that? I don't know. Failure, and then adapting and trying to figure things out for myself. So you had mentioned that earlier. I think you're spot on, that what does this actually look like is the biggest piece of professional development and learning for teachers that is missing.
Totally. And like we've talked about this for a while at the organization, I don't think teachers are prepared appropriately for the profession. I think frequently they're in these theory-based classes that are talking about research, and they're talking about principles, and they're talking about law and legal. But you're like, and a lot of times you learn about, this is the thing that bothers me the most about this. I can go on and on about this, but like, and I had a post about this recently. If you like sports, I've always found that like teacher professional learning, and in particular teaching teacher prep, it's as if they teach you about individual skills, but they don't actually teach you any plays. So like, here's how you dribble a basketball. And if you want to make a layup, like you got to put it in that box on the back. And then they're like, cool, here's the game. Yeah. And you're like, I have to connect the idea that small group instruction is important with the idea that I have 25 humans in here and the bell just rang. And that requires a playbook, not just a set of discrete skills. And the thing that I think has been missing for so long is you will get discrete skills, you won't get plays, you won't get the playbook. And then as a teacher, you go, wait a minute, now I feel bad about myself because I can't do small group instruction because I don't know how to get there, but I know it's important. What does that mean about me and my performance?
We have also run into in our work. So Marie and I, and listeners of the podcast know, we focus a lot on inquiry is one of the foundational pieces that we draw from in Brave New Teaching. But the service of inquiry is to distance teachers from feeling the need, because we serve mostly ELA teachers here. A lot of teachers come from other subject areas. But in the ELA community, there's this kind of unwritten, nebulous compulsion/need that we feel like students need to read and participate in every single novel from cover to cover. And if I'm not with them word for word through that experience, they won't learn something. I'm crudely describing that. And so when we talk about inquiry, it's not to kind of slap a label on it, but it's to say, no, let's zoom out and think about what are we trying to discover through this experience of the unit. And let's take this text and make it a vehicle toward learning other things about the world, ourselves, and these other really cool things. And that is very hard. I wonder if you see that with your mentees. Are there, because I'm not familiar with other subject areas as much, are there other unwritten rules that you've seen that teachers feel compelled to, it's very hard for a teacher to say, wait, you don't want me to read all of the Great Gatsby to my students all unit long? I'm like, no, we don't want you to do that. But they feel like they're supposed to, or we're supposed to read all of Romeo and Juliet. And I say, well, why don't we watch it? And there's like a very shallow heart attack happening across, riveting throughout the nation. Do you see that in other areas, or just other areas of this process of distancing them from lecture style, whole class style? What do you see happening, and how are you helping teachers with that?
Yeah. So I think the broader rule that we are talking about here, or the broader principle that guides those behaviors, is that educators are irrationally committed to rule following. And it is really interesting.
Yes.
I was not a rule follower.
No, me neither.
And I didn't realize the degree with which I wasn't a rule follower until I saw all my peers and how quickly they responded to the rules and how restrictive that is. So one of the things that I've talked about a lot with researchers and other folks in the space is a lot of times the way initiatives get rolled down to teachers is as follows. Like, someone at a decision-making level collaborates with someone with a good idea, and they're like, oh, this is compelling. This curriculum seems like a good curriculum to improve instruction. We're going to adopt this curriculum. The curriculum company or the person who created the ed tech tool, whatever idea they have, they're not necessarily obsessed with everyone following it with very specific rules. But by the time it goes through all these systems of change management, the way the teacher hears it is, you do this like this every day or you're wrong.
Or else.
What's interesting about that is most teachers are really by themselves in their classroom with their students for 175 out of 181 days in a year, right? So what I always encourage teachers, and this is not an encouragement to go and break rules, it's an encouragement for people to not forget what the primary objective is, which is to have students learn, and that objective supersedes everything else in the learning experience. So if you're overly concerned about following rules and have forgotten why you're doing this work in the first place, you probably kind of veered off base, and you're probably a little bit too obsessed with the directives that aren't as sticky as you think they are. I think the most important one is, hey, I have to teach all these skills to my students. Two things cannot be true. You can't have to teach 78 standards and have a diversity of learning levels. Like, those two things are impossible, right? If time is fixed, which it is, you have 181 days or how many days, that we can't negotiate with. We have a curriculum and a group of students with a high diversity of learning levels. You have to accept, when time is fixed and those two things are true, that you have to be flexible about how much content you can get through depending on student. And I think that holds true not just in English. I think that holds true in every single subject area. And I think that's the driving force behind why folks will sacrifice really high quality learning experiences in service of just slamming through content, because that's what we got to do.
I was just going to say, the getting through content. I can't even, I left the classroom in 2021 for family reasons and a lot of other things, but I was in 2021 and 2023, we are still hearing teachers use that phrase. I have to get through the content, and that's become borderline acceptable at some of the places around here. And I don't know. I think we're at a bit of a standstill. I hope to hear more teachers joining Modern Classroom Project. I hope that more things like Modern Classroom Project are coming to light for schools who, will even tell me like, oh, we don't really have a lot of choices. Like, yeah, but you do. There are tons of ways to do this differently. But we're not.
Well, and one thing I'll say too, I spend a lot of my time collaborating, not just with teachers, but also principals and assistant superintendents, chief academic officers, and all that kind of stuff. And what I'd say is, contrary to what it may feel like when you're a teacher, almost every leader I've ever collaborated with just wants to see high quality learning experiences that are rigorous. Yeah. It doesn't feel that way all the time. But what I would say is, if you're a teacher in a community and you're wondering, can I take this risk? Can I do this thing? Can I try this thing? If you're teaching rigorous content and students are engaged, your admin are going to be happy, generally speaking. And that means that you can modify, how you're delivering that curriculum to make it right for your students. That can mean choosing certain anchor standards to prioritize over others. That can mean extending a lesson that was supposed to be 1 day long and making it 3 days long to really dig into inquiry. Like, trust that people overarchingly care about high quality learning experiences and engaged learning experiences, and don't over anchor towards just following the rules, because the rules don't always make a ton of sense.
The rules are stupid. I feel like you have, Kareem, I think you've just kind of like given us like the most beautiful little audio moment for exactly what brave new teaching is. I mean, that's where we started, was to give teachers a space and a place to feel empowered to challenge the status quo. And I think you're dead on. If what you're doing to challenge the status quo is high quality instruction, rigorous, and you're working your freaking butt off, I don't think anyone's going to be upset with you.
No, they're not.
Unless
I had a principal, which was not principal like leader principal for myself, which was innovate and ask for forgiveness later. And it was just a phrase I told myself, less so because I thought I was doing anything all that risky, but more so to remind myself that I can make innovative calls in my classroom. And if someone says, why did you do that? Or was unhappy with it, I could say, look, I did this for this reason. Mm-hmm. If you don't think it works, or you don't think it's effective, certainly let me know. And if I need to pivot off it, I understand, but I need the space to try new things. And also just understand, like, what are the things you probably shouldn't do that are actually maybe not great for students? Like deciding that you're going to teach first grade math to fifth graders, probably not the move, right? Reducing the rigor so much in an English classroom such that, you're not really teaching grade level content. Yeah, there are real implications to that, right? That means that group of students is now not being pushed as hard as they should be. That's real, right? That's not the same thing as I only taught 72 out of 79 standards, right? That's a very different discussion. So I stress folks really thinking hard about what is it that we shouldn't be doing and what is it that we should be doing. So when you are innovating and when you are tinkering, you're not tinkering so far that you're taking some risks that would really bother people who care deeply about students having, rigorous experiences every single day.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think we're here to support you guys as along the way. And if you're finding yourself in a school culture that does look down on this, and you're finding that I have found this too. The more I innovated, the more people got suspicious, right? Like we are also contending, especially I think we're feeling it very deeply at the high school English level in terms of books and content and things like that. There's a lot of parent and school board oversight that I think is really playing into this need for us to follow the rules because we want to be protected. And as scary as it can be to innovate in a culture where that is a very real part of, I can remember that, like, the sick to my stomach feeling I got the day that I walked into the classroom to teach the 1619 project to my juniors in high school who were already like on their way to college, borderline adults, with permission of the principal, but knowing I was going to get pushback from parents in Northern Illinois. I can remember that feeling and doing it anyway, but not everyone's going to feel that. So there are different ways to be innovative. There are different ways to change your instructional practices that are not connected to content. But no matter what it is, I would say for sure we would encourage you to stretch as much as you can for the betterment of kids.
Totally. And pick your battles, right? Pick your battles. Be thoughtful about your battles. Not just because you don't want to have a ton of arguments, but actually because when you pick your battles, you can only actually have so many fights, right? Like you're very busy. So when you pick your battles, you get to focus on the things that matter to you deeply and build the case for support, and then really do it well. And that's the most important thing you can do as a teacher.
Kareem, let's wrap things up. I want to hear your vision for the future of the Modern Classroom Project. Where are you headed? What do you see in the next 5, 10, 15 years? And what do we have to look forward from you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, I don't know that I said this at any point in the conversation, but we're an opt-in only model. So it's never forced on teachers in any context. So, I've always said that my dream is to live in a world where educators wake up in the morning and just know that there is more than one way to teach. And one of those ways is blended self-paced, mastery-based. So our vision is to get this in as many educators' hands as possible. And it has to be opt-in. So we can have that vision as long as we have the principle that in doing that, we're never forcing teachers to do that. So, like my strategic plan that I just made says we want to get 50,000 teachers enrolled into our virtual mentorship program by 2026. And right now we're at 11,000. Like that's the number. But the broader goal is to just make sure that every teacher across the world understands that there isn't just one way to teach, that there are many ways to teach, and one of them is the modern classrooms approach. And then, on a more granular sort of innovative way, I think we're really exploring the ways that this model and just teaching in general can be made easier by leveraging AI. I think there's a huge AI discussion right now. I think a lot of it's kind of goofy. Like if you think that some sort of AI co-pilot thing on your computer is going to teach students math and that's the solution, you don't understand how school works and you don't understand how kids work. But if we can leverage AI to make sure that planning time is reduced, that we actually do get to spend more time working with students one-on-one in small groups, I think that that's really compelling. We just got to figure out how to way to do it right. So a lot of what we're spending time on from an innovation perspective is just how do we make this model easier to adopt, and what role does AI have in that process, so that teachers are really spending as much of the time that they have doing the harder cognitive things, motivating students, addressing learning needs, using data to drive decision-making in the classroom. So I'm curious to see where we go with that. I don't necessarily have a clear answer to how it's going to work. What I know is we have some clear principles, which is that teachers are the most important factor in student learning outside of the student themselves, that educators need to opt into innovation, and that they're really spread thin at the moment.
They are. And I will tell you my most innovative idea, and I swear one of these days I will make this happen. If I worked at the university level, I would love to set up a way that my pre-service teachers could get paid hourly to do grading. Wouldn't that be incredible? Learning experience. I think they need to be involved in the class a little bit too. But again, that model could be so powerful. Talk about taking something off of a teacher's plate, and then teachers grade I don't know. I think that there's another vision there too. And then we have so much time to do what teachers need to do.
Totally. Plus, doesn't that happen at the university level anyways? We just don't do it for teachers, right? Aren't there TAs all over the place grading for their professors? So, hey, get that going. It's the gig economy too. Don't drive Uber. Great.
Right? Forget Uber. Yeah. Grade essays for a tired teacher and then give her a report about what. Yeah. I mean,
I hear you. I love it.
The future is bright. Thank you so much for talking with us today, Kareem. Can you tell everyone who's listening the best way to get either a hold of you or involved in the project other than going to the show notes? Where can they find you guys?
Yeah, totally. So, modernclassrooms.org is our website. Our free course is learn.modernclassrooms.org. And most of my thought leadership now actually lives on LinkedIn. So if you want to hear my perspective on K-12 education, or even reach me in a DM, go to LinkedIn, Kareem Farah, Kareem, Farah, Farah, and you'll see me. And that's where most of my ideas and updates come in. So those are probably the three best places, those first two for accessing our work at the organization, and LinkedIn for accessing me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks again for listening to Brave New Teaching.
We'd love to keep the conversation going over on Instagram.
And while you're there, check out the links in our bio for the most up-to-date events going on in the Brave New Teaching community.
Thanks for being here, and have a great week at school.